Let me start by welcoming you to this podcast, which will introduce my book, The Time is Near, Volume 1, God's Plan Revealed by Daniel, Jesus, and Paul. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ian Foley. I was born in May 1945, just at the end of World War II. I was born in the UK and migrated with my parents to Australia in 1957. I have lived through 80 years of the extraordinary growth in our modern civilization, the only worldwide civilization that has ever existed. When I was 11 years old, I placed my trust in Jesus and have grown to love God and to live for Him and to love His Word. I studied science at the University of Melbourne with a physics major and ended with a PhD in atmospheric physics in 1972. In 1973, I married a wonderful Malaysian Chinese girl who came to Australia as a student in 1970. We have 2 daughters who are both married and altogether have 6 grandchildren, 3 boys and 3 girls. After completing my PhD, we moved to Canberra and I pursued an academic career as a lecturer in computer science at the University of Canberra, and then back in Melbourne in 1981 at Swinburne University. In 1989, I had an amazing experience of God's love for me and lived through an extraordinary time of growing understanding of God's plan. I started pastoring Hope Melbourne Christian Church, a church which is part of a worldwide church planting movement called Hope International Ministries. The end time position that I hold began in May 2006. And led to me publishing my 2 books entitled The Time is Near in 2014 and 2016. It was an exciting, extraordinary and challenging time of revelation. These 2 books are now being republished. I want to talk a little bit about the big picture now. In an era where last days discourse is often polarized between sensationalism and silence, this podcast emerges as a bold and intellectually serious intervention. It engages with the book of Daniel, particularly chapters 11 and 12, offering an interpretation that is both historically grounded and theologically rigorous. And it is also unique and very challenging to all existing views. When we look at the worldwide church's views on end-time theology, there is massive confusion and controversy. Most pastors that I know have avoided going there because it is unedifying. They are satisfied to recognize that Jesus is returning soon and the world is heading toward the end times. However, this ignorance and confusion also means that there is a lack of recognition of how close the end could be. When we examine the Bible carefully, especially Daniel and Revelation, there is evidence about where we are in God's plan. The return of Jesus could be quite soon. Thus, the title of my books, The Time is Near. My deep concern is to see so much strong teaching on the end times, yet so highly variable, especially when we consider the victorious eschatology approach, which sees much of the world turning to Jesus before he returns, and the opposite view of a final period of great tribulation, including many who say Christians will be taken up to heaven 7 years before Jesus returns. How will many believers feel when the strong teaching they have received does not happen? We need to know the truth so we can be properly prepared. The strong teaching in my books has superior, compelling biblical support, distinctly different from those widely publicized. On top of that, the biblical perspectives in my books recognize the growing worldwide economic issues, resource depletion, especially in fossil fuels, increasing water stress, climate change, and geopolitical conflict as nations look to preserve their economic strength. These issues are part of the content in Volume 2 of The Time is Near. Since the publication of The Time is Near, Volumes 1 and 2 in 2014 and 2016 respectively, huge changes have occurred in the world. These two books present a picture of God's unfolding plan in the Bible, which portrays today more accurately than any existing end-time work that is available for purchase. These books are now being republished with minor upgrades and with a stronger marketing strategy. Let us now go to my PowerPoints, and I'm going to work from the PowerPoints from this time on. On Monday in May 2006, when I was really looking very closely at end-time theology, I was amazed to see that the king in Daniel 11:36 was Rome, the Roman Empire. The key passage that radically changes existing end-time theology is found in the final part of Daniel's last vision from Daniel 11:36 to 12:13. We are going to now unlock that key. Most commentaries say that this passage does not match history well. That is wrong. There is a very good historical match of Daniel 11:36 to 45 with the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Let's look at it a bit more closely. Daniel 11:36, and the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers. And you notice there I've added the wolf god, because when the Roman Empire began, that was who they worshipped. Or to the one beloved by women, and that would be Juno, the wife of Zeus, because Rome adopted the Greek pantheon of gods, and Juno was the wife of Zeus. Then the king, he shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. And I think if you read the history of what happened in the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, and then Imperial Rome afterwards, you will see that that indeed is the case. Going on, the king shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. And I think we all probably know that Rome invested enormous wealth into its military forces, and they were extraordinarily powerful. Rome was very good at siege warfare. It says here, he shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. And I understand that that foreign god was Mithras, the Persian god, because they believed in life after death. And many of the soldiers found that encouraging. It gave them hope. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. If you look again at Rome as they established their empire, they purchased properties all over the empire, and indeed they honored those who honored their emperor. Now I want to come to Daniel 11:40, which I think is a key verse in recognizing that this is about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. And I've given a couple of different translations here. Daniel 11:40 says, "And at the time of the end, the king of the south will wage war with him," that's the king, "and the king of the north will storm against him," against the king, "with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships." And here's another translation by Ernest Lucas, who wrote a commentary which he published in 2002. "At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage in a strong battle with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots and horsemen and many ships." Now, when I examined this and examined the history, if you look at the history in the 2 and 3 centuries from Daniel up until Jesus, you'll find out that Rome engaged in no significant naval battles apart from his battles with Antiochus the Great, the Seleucid king to the north of the land of Israel. And you'll notice the translation in here, in pretty much all the translations, suggests that the king of the south attacked the king. And if you look very carefully at the Hebrew, it's possible actually to translate it a little bit like what Lucas does here. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage in a struggle with him. And it's possible to understand the Hebrew here to mean that they're on the same side. The king of the south and the king fought on the same time together, and the king of the north engaged in battle with Rome. If you look at history, you'll see that this matches history very well. So it's possible to interpret the Hebrew text as the king of the south engaged in battle on the same side as the king. And the king of the south, of course, is a reference to the Egyptian Ptolemaic kingdom. And indeed, they were at war with the king of the north, but Rome fought on the same side with them. So with this understanding of the Daniel 11:40, we actually find that the history here matches very, very well what happened as Rome entered into the Eastern Mediterranean region within, if you like, the recognition of those living in Jerusalem. So we find this is the time when Rome started to engage with Jerusalem and was known to them. In fact, if we look closely at the history between Rome and the king of the north, Antiochus III, we discover that there were three major naval battles, and I've listed them there. Corius in 191 BCE, Eurymedon in 190, and Myonnesus in 190. Followed by the land battle, well known, the Battle of Magnesia, when Antiochus III was defeated. And Rome was able to engage with Antiochus III in Asia Minor because they had taken, through their naval victories, control of the Aegean Sea region. So they're able to support their armies in Asia Minor. And that was indeed the beginning of the advance of Rome across Asia Minor and eventually to Jerusalem in 63 BCE. So reading on in Daniel 11:40, it says, "And he," that is the king, and I would say the Roman Empire, "came into countries and shall overflow and pass through." That's what happened as Rome advanced through Asia Minor and eventually captured Jerusalem in 63 BC under the Roman Empire General Pompey. "And tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand." This is very interesting. So when Daniel wrote these words, as I believe, in the 6th century, indeed Edom and Moab and Ammon were existing countries. But by the time Rome came and captured Jerusalem, they had been replaced by the Arabian peoples, the Nabateans, with their capital in Petra. And if you read about what Josephus wrote, you will discover there that Rome bribed the Nabateans with 300 talents and did not actually take over the region of Edom and Moab and Ammon, exactly as is prophesied here. Reading on, it says, "The king shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And he shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train." Rome's trade with Egypt was a primary source of wealth for the Roman Empire. And reading on, "But news from the east and the north shall alarm him," that's Rome, "and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction." And historically, we understand that Rome continually was at war with, I think, the Sassanids in the east and then the barbarians in the north. Eventually, the northern barbarians in 476 Christian era captured Rome. So, of course, there's a foreshortening here of what happened, but it accurately pictures the latter years of the Roman Empire in Rome. And then verse 45, "And Rome, he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain." And we know that Judea became a province of Rome, and their capital was located in the city of Caesarea. And eventually, of course, the Roman Empire fell with no one to help, which is actually in contrast. In Daniel 11:34, when Antiochus IV was attacking and seeking to Hellenize the Jews living in Jerusalem, there was help, and the Jews were able to recover control over the temple, as the book of the Maccabees talks about. So here is a picture of the eventual scale of the Roman Empire, sorry, not Judea, it's Palestina. It was the name of the Roman province with the capital in Caesarea. I just want to make a comment about the time at the end, because if you look at many commentaries, many scholars think the time at the end is the time near Jesus' return in the far future. But that is not the case. I think we need to understand that the time of the end was a time that from Daniel's perspective was beyond what he knew. So Daniel knew about the Persian Empire, Daniel knew about the Greeks, but he did not know about the empires that would follow them. And so I think we need to understand that the time of the end begins with the Roman Empire. And as we have just described, Rome entered the eastern Mediterranean region in 192 BC as a result of their conflict with Antiochus III. And but Rome did not actually appear in Jerusalem until Pompey captured Jerusalem in 63 BCE. But that's the time at the end as far as the Bible is concerned. So I want us to see the change in perspective that we see in Daniel 11. Initially, it's about the Persian Empire a little bit, and then there's an extensive description of the history of the Greek Empire, so the focus is on Greece. But when we come to talk about the king, the focus changes to Rome. And it's important to see that that change in perspective. Actually, Antiochus III's his reign was a little bit before Antiochus IV. And so when we see the description about the king, the character of the king, the character of the Roman Empire and their history, it actually it backtracks a little bit, about 20 or 30 years. And then we get this new focus on Rome. I want now to look at the consequences of this. The reference to the suffering of the Jews in Daniel 12:1 is suffering under the Roman Empire. It is not the suffering at the end of the age as many scholars understand. And I want to say that I think there's strong evidence that Jesus knew this. And we can see this because if we compare Daniel 12:1b, it talks there about the suffering of the Jews, and there shall be a time of trouble. This is for the Jewish people, the people living in the promised land, such as had never been since there was a nation until that time. So Daniel 12:1 says the suffering of the Jews under Rome was the worst until then. But then if we go on and look at what Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 24:21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be. So there's that extra phrase that Jesus used to indicate that the suffering that Jesus was talking about, which I believe is just before the end of the age, was the worst until then, and it's never going to be repeated, in contrast to the suffering that the Jews experienced under the Roman Empire. So Jesus alludes to Daniel 12:1, but states that the trouble then was the worst until then, but the one he is referring to will be the worst ever and never repeated. That's the first consequence. Second consequence, we read in Daniel 12:6 that the man in linen who is revealing these things to Daniel, there's a person who asks him a question. And the question is, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I think you need to imagine you're standing at a bus stop and there's a person there waiting for the bus, and you ask him, how long will it be before you get home? That person will answer that question assuming that his now is the beginning of the time being talked about. And so it is here in this passage. Daniel is receiving this word from the man in linen in the 3rd year of Cyrus, which is probably about 535 years before Jesus, 535 BCE. And he is told that this will be for a period of time called this strange enigmatic phrase, a time, times, and half a time. And at the end of that period, the power of the Jews will come to an end. And historically, we know, under the Roman Empire, the Jews were scattered all over the Roman Empire and even beyond. And until the Islamic kingdom took over Jerusalem in 638 CE. That's a period of about 1200 years. And I want to say to you categorically and strongly, the time, times, and half a time is not 3.5 years, as the vast majority of commentators say. It is in excess of 1200 years. An extraordinary length of time. That's a radical change as a consequence of understanding that the king indeed is the Roman Empire. And so what then is the emerging consequence of this? Because, interestingly, in the book of Daniel, there are 2 references to this period of time called the time, times, and a half a time. The other occasion is in Daniel 7:25. And let me just advance. Daniel 7:25. It says, and this is talking about the little horn that emerges out of the 4th beastly kingdom. In Daniel 7:8, I consider the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And then we come, this little horn emerges out of the 4th kingdom, which many scholars believe to be the Roman Empire. And what they say is that this little horn is the Antichrist at the end of the age. But far more logically, I suggest to you, if this little horn is coming out of the Roman Empire, maybe that happens straight away. And then if we look at Daniel 7:25, it says about the little horn, he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. And I suggest to you that has huge implications. In fact, the 2 time, times, and half a time are contiguous times. The first one spans the Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. The second one starts in Daniel 7:25, emerges out of the Roman Empire. And I think we can see, and it's still, if it's going to be like the first one, it's going to last for at least 1200 years, I would suggest to you. And so what kingdom, what empire grew out of the Roman Empire and is still present today? The Islamic kingdom. And so the little horn must be the founder of Islam. And so this is very, very significant in our understanding of what Daniel is saying. So this times and a half of time are two contiguous periods of time, which symbolically are each 3.5, but both of which literally exceed 1200 years in length. The first starts in the 3rd year of Cyrus, and it extends until the abomination of desolation described in Daniel 12:11 is set up. That is the Dome of the Rock, and I suggest 688 BC. Conclusion. So what we see from this understanding and interpretation of the book of Daniel is that it radically changes our eschatology. It is like a Star Trek experience going where no one has been before. My books examine the consequences of this in detail, and those consequences lead to an interpretation of Revelation forecasting a world in our day very like what we are experiencing. A world dominated by two civilizations, one which is the resource-based world in which we live, and the other Islamic. The two empires described in Revelation 13. And we can also see a world facing economic collapse, food and water shortage, and climate change described in Revelation 16. Indeed, the time of Jesus' return is soon.